romance, love, social convention, gender roles, and religion. Charlotte Bronte's most famous novel challenges ideas on all these topics, and we are here to discuss it. I'm Charlene.
And I'm Mike.
And this is Jane Eyre Files. Chapter 35, By Nature and Principle. Hello, husband.
Hello, my fitting fellow laborer.
Well, I like that we're fellow laborers. You know, we have equality here.
Yes, we formed a bond.
You also do a lot of work around the house, so you're also a fellow laborer.
Oh, yeah. In our situation, you work a lot in the house. I work a lot outside the house.
Yes.
But it's a house. We have a house now, so it's kind of cool that we get to do that.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so what's to this chapter?
We do get a better look at St. John and his personality, his quirks.
Yeah, we're kind of dealt with the shock of the marriage proposal from the last chapter, and now it's sort of a redundant chapter. It's a lot of dialogue, and
Well, there's a turning point at the end, so we get to that moment.
Yeah, but I guess let's jump right in. What's the Spark Notes summary I have to say for chapter 35?
During the following week, St. John continues to pressure Jane to marry him. She resists as kindly as she can, but her kindness only makes him insist more bitterly and unyieldingly that she accompany him to India as his wife. Diana tells Jane that she would be a fool to go to India with St. John, who considers her merely a tool to aid his great cause. After dinner, St. John prays for Jane, and she is overcome with awe at his powers of speech and his influence. She almost feels compelled to marry him, but at that moment she hears what she thinks is Rochester's voice. Did you hear something?
Jane.
Calling her name as if from a great distance. Jane believes that something fateful has occurred and St. John's spell over her is broken.
There is a supernatural occurrence happening as we record this podcast.
Did you hear that? That wasn't just me?
I'm just assuming. You seem startled, so I'm just guessing.
I gotta go run outside real quick.
Yeah, the great. You know what's funny was when we read this chapter, I had got about halfway through, and you were in the other room, and I said, "Okay." You said, "How's everything going?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's just a lot of the same old stuff, and just him trying to pressure her." And you're like, "Oh, but I remember what happens at the end, right?" Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Oh, it didn't quite dawn on me until it hits," and you're like, "Ah, that's right. Yeah, great moment."
Yes. But first, we have to get through a little bit of St. John's stubbornness.
Yeah, you said we're going to get a better look at what he really is, right?
What he meant when he said that he's a cold man, because he gives Jane this silent treatment, which is not. I guess it's not really revenge, I think, but more on principle to convince Jane that she's done wrong and she should make it up to him by agreeing to his wishes.
Yeah,
but it's very manipulative.
Oh, for sure.
And it's sad, too.
Yeah.
Especially since Jane is she really wants to have that closeness back. And, it's just completely gone from him.
Yeah, and I feel like he's a proud man. But at the same time, yeah, he does kind of just need to let it go.
Oh, yeah.
And I know, I was jokingly, when I was reading it, I kind of had the thought about the idea of the friend zone. Mm-hmm. Even though it's even though his love for her is not like a romantic love, right?
He's not terribly sad that she doesn't want to marry him because she doesn't love him.
Yeah, but at a certain point, maybe it's better to just leave the person alone. You can't keep bugging them.
I wonder if she had admitted to saying that she doesn't feel like she's fit for it, or she, she's explain in a better way, like, I can't do this, if he would have accepted it. But since he thinks that she can do it and she'd be really great at it, and Jane thinks so as well, then he just feels like, oh, this is just a horrible shame that you're not coming with me because you'd be such a great missionary wife.
Oh, I guess, yeah. And it must be tough to move past it for him, I mean, I guess there's this notion of, no means no, but I wonder...
Not necessarily at that time, probably.
Yeah. I wonder if there was this idea that maybe you could, melt her down and change her mind. Something.
You know what? That makes a point, because maybe that's something that St. John has experienced in the past, of being able to convince people to do what he wants by just looking at them sternly or something.
A member of the clergy being able to convince people to do what they want. I've never heard of such a thing. But I also, we joke about how a lot of this book seems to draw parallels with Charlotte Bronte's life. And, the man she married, she already turned down one of his proposals, right?
and he wore her down? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Although that came after this book was published.
Oh, that's true. Good point.
So maybe he read the book and he's like, St. John. he had a good idea right there.
Yeah. Let me see. I'll just keep chipping away and then eventually she'll come around, I guess. Yeah. But I wondered if, like I said, did Arthur Bell Nichols use religion in the way that St. John did? I wonder.
I hope not.
Yeah.
I think if he did that, Charlotte would have seen right through that.
Mm-hmm.
As she was, religious in her way, where she wasn't dogmatically following every stricture, every principle. She really thought about how God, loves, love first, I think, is her idea of religion, which is great. Mm-hmm. I subscribe to that.
Yeah.
And I also think it's mind-boggling how there's a moment when St. John, who's like, okay, if you don't want to marry me, I'll have my missionary friend, you can accompany him and his wife instead, so you could fulfill your promise. Like, she made this big commitment already, and Jane's like, I didn't. The reader knows I didn't.
Yeah, she did call that out. I put that in my notes. What promise?
Yeah.
And then she even says, reader, hello. It reminds me of one of my favorite TV shows, Saved by the Bell. When Zach Morris used to call time out and looked at the camera and broke the fourth wall.
I can imagine, yeah. Jane's like, what?
Yes. The creators of Saved by the Bell were clearly inspired by Jane Eyre. Yes.
But poor Jane, he's really forcing this vision he has of her life on her.
Yeah, it seems a little odd, almost kind of like passive-aggressive, Because I read this whole section, the previous chapter as well, as Jane saying that she would like to assist her newfound family member and maybe do some traveling. Yeah. More so than her saying, I'm going to be a missionary. Yeah. Did I read that wrong?
No. This is not the life that she wanted. She had some, I think, simpler idea of living, just sort of on her own, for herself. But, now that she has family, she could focus on herself for a little bit before she has to throw herself into helping other people, after all that she's been through.
Yeah, and we joke, but I feel like sometimes you have to be able to read the room.
Yeah,
and with St. John, it's kind of going past his head. I will just say for our listeners out there, just to bring it to a personal level, Charlene is deathly afraid of water. Does not like going into a swimming pool. Definitely does not like going into the ocean.
Oh, no.
And I feel like this would be me asking you if you wanted to go snorkeling. When I was growing up in Hawaii, I did go snorkeling once, and it was fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
You don't stay under the water very long. I got to see a lot of cool fish swimming around. My friend bought a bag of frozen peas and just dropped them in, and the fish were eating them up.
Oh, okay.
Just swimming all around you. It was really cool.
Yeah. Can I watch that from the shore?
What I'm saying. This would be like me just saying, well, clearly you should go snorkeling with me. Even though I know it's not your thing.
This is a one-to-one comparison, exactly the same.
Yeah, St. John trying to get her to marry him is like me trying to get you to go snorkeling.
Yes.
So do you want to go snorkeling?
No.
Okay. Are you sure?
I mean, did you have any scripture that supports snorkeling at all?
The American Snorkeling Association compels you to go, and if you don't go, you would be making a huge mistake with your life.
Oh, really? Well, I think I hear someone calling me. So we've talked a lot about St. John and sort of his point of view, but again, Jane is really trying to smooth things over, and it just clearly goes wrong. Like, even I could tell that the way she speaks to him, like, it's very hyperbolic and emotional, that it just turns him off immediately, it seems like. He sees her as such a practical, down-to-earth, just very rational human being. Like, this emotion is just like, oh my God, what's happening probably for him.
Yeah, and it's like, I find it weird that this would be a turnoff for him, like, how dare a woman have independent thought? Yeah,
that she's not this in this box that I put on her.
Yeah, which is funny because I would also think that, during his time as a clergyman, he must have dealt with passionate, excitable women, no? Or was mostly everybody reserved back then?
Oh, no, I think it's more that, he had this, or has, hopefully, this respect for Jane. Maybe that he didn't necessarily have for other women if they were very emotional or frivolous, like Rosamund Oliver, where he probably understands that sort of thing would come from that woman. But from Jane, he expects more from her.
And I'm sure that, her saying that he was killing her
Yeah.
would probably be a little bit over the top.
Yeah, especially, such a religious man. He's probably thinking, this is just for your good. And now you're blaming, you're saying that I'm a murderer? How dare you?
Yeah. Well, like you said, you said it yourself, hyperbolic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is kind of out of Jane's character, isn't it?
Oh, well, I guess that's one point we should talk about is does that seem hyperbolic? Because I feel like maybe not. Like she really feels that cut up about it.
Yeah.
And the fact that, if she did go with him to India, it would be just terrible for her emotionally.
Well, I guess it's just hyperbolic coming from her. You don't hear her talking about, her own, like he says, it would kill me or something like that. That seems a little bit over the top for what we've kind of got to know from her. Well, but it makes sense though. But
now that you say that too, it's like, well, if leaving Mr. Rochester didn't kill her, then St. John's nothing, right?
Oh yeah,
come on, Jane.
For sure. But at least this time, as compared to Mr. Rochester, she does have sort of a bestie to kind of confide in, right?
So that's a lovely moment in this chapter where she gets to talk to Diana a little bit. Diana is very observant. She notices something's wrong, and also that she thinks that St. John might have proposed, and Jane now feels free to say, yeah, he did propose. Yeah,
Diana is great. I think she has the best insight into St. John as a person, right?
Yeah, it does seem like it.
And it's like, I'm sure we mentioned on the show, but like we say if you should get to know the siblings if you would consider being romantically involved with a person. And in a way, Jane is sort of using this resource.
Jane, you must tell me what business you and my brother have on hand. So agitated, so pale. I wish he loved you, Jane. Does he?
Not one whit.
Then why does he follow you with his eyes and get you so frequently alone with him? Both Mary and I had concluded that he wished you to marry him.
Oh, he has asked me to be his wife. Or rather, a fitting fellow labourer in his Indian toils.
He wishes you to go to India?
Yes.
But that is madness. You would not live 3 months in India. You've not consented.
I have refused to marry.
And consequently displeased him?
Deeply. And yet, I offered to accompany him as a sister.
It was fantastic folly to do so, Jane.
Oh, but he is so good, so noble. I cannot be insensitive to his virtues.
He would urge you to impossibilities, and you would force yourself to perform them. I'm astonished you even found courage to refuse his hand.
And I think you pointed out to me that Diana says that Jane is pretty.
Yes.
Right?
And that's really nice, because I think it's the only time that any character has said that Jane is pretty.
Not even Rochester, huh?
No, Rochester is honest. I mean, I think he does say it, but it's like he already said that she's not pretty, so he's saying it now because he's looking at her with love, and she's now pretty in his eyes.
But they started their relationship off by him saying, "Do you find me handsome?" and she said no.
So you think Miss Rochester
maybe he was just holding it in, and it wasn't going to give her the benefit of the doubt by saying that she was attractive.
Possibly, that's true.
Yeah.
And then there's a moment where Jane, when she's talking to Diana, says that she could conceive a torturing kind of love for St. John.
Torturing kind of love.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking that's more of a brotherly, like a very close relationship kind of love, and not necessarily romantic. But she does say because he is, quote, so talented, and there's often a certain heroic grandeur in his look, manner, and conversation. So that seems more like like someone who's enamored of a celebrity, right?
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I'm just trying to say that Jane could never love anyone as she loves Mr. Rochester.
Yeah, but then she said it. Didn't she just recently say, "No one's ever going to love me again"? Anyway.
Well, St. John's not going to love her like that. That's for sure.
Yeah, and then you get that torturing kind of love. You couldn't do that.
Not for me. No, I don't think I would have had any kind of sense of love for St. John as a person who took me out of my home and forced me to do something that, probably would kill me in the end. So yeah, Jane, you are a stronger woman than I.
Yeah. You would have just ended up resenting him, I'm sure. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of those women who think they can kind of change a man, right? Like
that's true.
It's a challenge. They see it as a challenge, but I'm sure it's gonna end the same way.
with disappointment.
This would be the same situation. Yeah. And I know we've talked about loveless marriages before, and it's kind of sad that Jane is even considering it.
Yeah. Just for the security or something.
Just because of his oratory skills, right? She heard him give a sermon, and all of a sudden she was like, okay, maybe I could. He's more persuasive than she realized.
Well, yeah. Well, especially that the idea of if she's in awe of him, then I guess she might want to just follow him, whatever he says.
Yeah, and like you said, I wonder if there is some sort of religious duty that she might feel in some capacity, right? Probably
instilled in her since at a young age. So yeah, that's very true.
And doesn't he use like Bible verses to try to convince her?
Yes. So there's a part now after they've had this talk, and Jane's said no again, and St. John seems a little bit even more hurt by her emotion, that St. John decides to take a different tact, and he reads some choice selections from the Bible that highlights what happens if you don't follow God's word. But I also think he's a lot more gentle with her, showing a little bit more kindness and affection, which I think would have gone a long way for St. John if he planned to do that in the beginning.
No doubt. Yeah. But I mean, like I said, do you think he's getting desperate at this point?
Yeah, trying all avenues afforded to him. Yeah.
You get more flies with honey than vinegar, I think. Yeah. But is there like no way that he could have gone without her? Like, he's just really...
That's why I think it's not necessarily that he can't do it. It's that he feels like it would be such a shame if she couldn't do it. Like, it should be her calling because she could be so good at it.
Yeah. So if I would quote Bible verses to get you to go snorkeling, that that if thou art thrust thyself into amongst the creatures of the sea, no, you sure you still don't want to go snorkeling?
I'll pass. Thank you.
No, okay.
But nice try. Didn't quite work on me. However, Jane does have that. I think a stronger temptation now that St. John is a little bit nicer, and he's like so clearly giving her an idea of what God wants, I think. Mm-hmm. And I find it intriguing that, in a way that this temptation is just as strong as the temptation she felt when leaving Rochester.
It's funny. It's not quite the love triangle we were expecting, but it does kind of highlight what types of choices the Victorian era women had when it came to finding a suitor, right? I'm sure many women didn't find their Rochester and even maybe settled for a St. John type.
It's very sad to think about, but that's true. I mean, St. John, in many ways, I think he presents a good alternative because, he's going to be faithful, I'm sure.
Gainfully employed.
He's a good person.
Devout.
Yeah. So
if you're... Looks like Apollo.
Easy on the eyes, but if you're more concerned with having someone who, your soulmate, someone you can really talk to, and St. John's not going to fulfill that for you. But maybe at that time, it's not as important to some women.
Yeah, and it's nice to have a soulmate you can talk to, or a soulmate who calls your name through the wind.
I thought you said who will go snorkeling with you.
Well, that too.
So, yeah, I think that we come to a point in this chapter, which is really the first and only supernatural event in this Gothic story, because supernatural events are a hallmark of Gothic tales, but all the other kind of weird or mysterious happenings were explained by Bertha.
Yeah, you pointed that out to me. It totally didn't dawn on me that, it's known as this Gothic book, right? This Gothic romance with the wearing the white dress and running away from the big house. But yet, you're right. Everything could be explained away, And I wondered if Charlotte planned it like this. I wonder if there was supposed to be any other actual unexplained supernatural activity. And it kind of made me wonder what prompted Charlotte to add this element to it. Like, could she have just gone on and then maybe Jane had some sort of change of heart and says, I got to give Rochester one more try without hearing that? Because, like I said, she's avoided actual supernatural occurrences as Charlotte's been writing this, but yet you drop the Deus ex machina, drop it in when you paint yourself into a corner and you can't get out. And so she's like, how do I get Jane out of this predicament? And she's like, I'll bring the supernatural. And even though every other time I've brought it in, or at least hinted at it, it's been something that was, like I said, easily explained away by Bertha's presence.
Yeah, I really love Jane Eyre for being this realistic story in a lot of ways. You know, it's a little dramatic, and there's a lot of things that happen that probably don't happen a lot in real life, but it's always grounded in realism, grounded in Jane's personality and her viewpoints on life. You know, you can trust her, you know, as she's a very reliable narrator. And then you just have this little sort of emotional, supernatural moment that kind of turns the tide of the story. I mean, like you said, I guess I wonder if Charlotte could have introduced it in a more prosaic way of like, hang on, St. John, let me just go check on someone first, and then I'll get back to you.
Then I'll get back to you. Yeah.
But I think she knows how to make a good climax, you know, of the story. And it really elevates the mood at the end because Jane comes into her own, and the reader gets to hear Rochester for the first time in a few chapters, which, you know, I was always excited about that point.
Well, sure. But I was going to ask, like, you've read other Gothic romances. Do they have a lot of supernatural occurrences that are explained away, or do they keep them supernatural?
I think there's a healthy mix of like actual supernatural stories and then just grounded, but they're also Gothic in nature. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's an oddity that Charlotte does this.
Sure. I guess, okay, yeah, it's not really a cop-out. I joke about it, but this idea that, like I said, we got to get her out of this house, out of this situation that she's in. Let's just throw Rochester's voice in. But yeah, you're right. It does. It's a great contrast with Jane's feelings of resentment towards St. John, you know, and now it's time for her to return to the only man that she could ever marry, right? And it's, like you said, it sets up this really exciting conclusion. I have not read the next chapter yet. I'm kind of looking forward to it now because I remembered, that's right, there's that big bang at the end of this chapter, and I'm kind of ready to go, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, we could just go right into the interesting context here because this...
Although, are you sure you don't want to go snorkeling?
Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you.
I mean, okay. All right. What is the interesting context for this chapter?
So there's a quote from the biography written by Elizabeth Gaskell called The Life of Charlotte Bronte, when she mentions something that happened to Charlotte, in which she says, quote, "Someone conversing with her once objected, in my presence, to that part of Jane Eyre in which she hears Rochester's voice crying out to her in a great crisis of her life, he being many, many miles distant at the time. I do not know what incident was in Miss Bronte's recollection when she replied in a low voice, drawing in her breath, but it is a true thing. It really happened."
It really happened.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that there's really no other explanation. There's no other mention of it by Charlotte, maybe one of her letters of like what she meant by that or what exactly happened, because I think that's fascinating.
Well, and it seems like Charlotte draws a lot of things from her personal life into this novel.
Yeah. You know what they say, write what you know.
Well, yeah. And I wonder, now that this was already in her mind, you know, maybe this is why she finally agreed to marry Arthur Bell Nichols after originally turning him down the first time. Maybe there was a moment that she was out on the moors and she heard Charlotte. And it might have just been, it could have been somebody who was talking about traveling to North Carolina.
Oh.
But it traveled across the moors, and the next thing you know, she was like, I think that might have been Arthur Bell Nichols, that poor gentleman that I turned down his marriage proposal once.
Right.
Maybe I should chase him down and find him and say yes. All right. All joking aside, I think you mentioned it to me off the air, but the Jane Eyre musical makes reference to this moment, or there's like a pivotal song.
I just wanted to mention, I might even drop in a clip, but you know, there's the Broadway version of Jane Eyre the Musical by John Caird and Paul Gordon, which I really love and I highly recommend to anyone to listen to. The Broadway version was preceded by a tryout in La Jolla, San Diego, and I happen to have a audio recording of that version, and they changed it. You know, always tweak it a little bit in between the runs. And in this version of the musical, they begin with Mr. Rochester off stage just calling out Jane. And
really?
That kind of brings the story to life. And I just love that moment in the story.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it kind of gives me chills to listen to that way of framing. I love it. So, you know, it's a great moment in the book. And I love that the musical, at least one iteration of it, highlighted that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'll have to go see that at some point, yeah. speaking of great moments, we'll wrap up the episode as we always do with a meaningful passage or quote from this chapter. Charlene, I'll let you go first. What is your most meaningful passage or quote from chapter 35?
So it was difficult for me to find a quote from this chapter. I don't know why. I think it's too much St. John, you know. It's hard to get into his quotes. But there's a moment, well, Jane references Rochester a few times in this chapter, but there's a particular moment where she talks about how she's struggling with this decision with St. John, and referencing what I said earlier about how it kind of mirrors her struggle with Rochester and her decision to leave. So she says, quote, "I was almost as hard beset by him now as I had been once before, in a different way, by another. I was a fool both times. To have yielded then would have been an error of principle. To have yielded now would have been an error of judgment."
That's a good quote. I almost had that. That was one of my
in your
alternates.
list?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, so, we have a little bit of the, Jane is weighing her emotions versus her rationality. She has two versions of this rationality, where it's her principle or her judgment. Principle, obviously, is just, based on her beliefs and her morals. Mr. Rochester, is really not too much keeping her from deciding to stay with him. Whereas St. John, it's an error of judgment, which I think is a little bit more harsh of a viewpoint, in thinking, this is just a bad decision all around if I decided to go along with St. John's plan.
Yeah, could she live with herself?
I don't know. I don't think so. She'd be very unhappy, and she'd regret it.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Mike, what is the passage or quote you did pick?
Well, I went with something more obvious. There was a part of me that thought you were going to choose it as well, but mine is from the very end of the chapter, when St. John is trying to convince her. And right before she's starting to come around, she hears her name being called through the moors.
Oh, okay.
And
you picked
she
a romantic
says,
quote.
Yes. Jane says, quote, "I might have said, 'Where is it?' For it did not seem in the room, nor in the house, nor in the garden. It did not come out of the air, nor from under the earth, nor from overhead. I had heard it, where or whence, forever impossible to know. And it was the voice of a human being. A known, loved, well-remembered voice, that of Edward Fairfax Rochester. And it spoke in pain and woe, wildly, eerily, urgently." I know it's kind of obvious, but you get a little chill when you read that,
Again,
and
great moment.
Yeah, it's a total crowd pleaser, but it's filled with this tremendous sense of wonder.
Yeah.
What's that? Where was it? Was it here? Wasn't there? It reminds me of the Jack Skellington from Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, that song?
Isn't that song? What's that? What's this? And it's just, and he's like, what could it be? And again, it's right there at the end of the chapter. So it presents like a nice cliffhanger where you're like, okay, I can't wait to jump into the next one.
Yeah.
And so again, it seems a little bit obvious, but it's such a terrific and dramatic moment that I had to go with it. Yeah.
Okay, that's a perfect quote to end this episode with.
Yeah, but before we go, are you sure you don't want to go snorkeling?
Maybe.
Events?
No, I don't want to. No, you can't force me.
What if I bought you the snorkeling equipment and the fins and no?
How about a first edition copy of Jane Eyre?
Well, okay. What if I knew somebody who was also going to go snorkeling and you could go with that person instead?
This argument does not work for you.
I don't know. Okay. I probably would have a better chance of getting you to go to a NASCAR event. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. This really helps us grow and reach new listeners. If you want to talk Jane Eyre with me online, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at AirGuide. That's EYRE.
And if you want to hear more from me, I host my own podcast called Out of Touchstone, where my good friend Chad and I discuss all the films that Disney produced for their Touchstone Pictures label. You can also find me on Twitter at Mike DeKalb.
Thank you, and farewell for the present.